Let's come back home now. Here in Kenya, a one-day conference bringing together attorney generals, prosecutors, seasoned litigators, defense lawyers, human rights activists and government officials from across the country gets underway this morning to discuss the growing threat of human trafficking. In attendance at the conference will be Attorney General of Washington, D.C., Carl Racine, and the Attorney General of Illinois, Lisa Madigan. State House spokesman Manoy Sipisu says Kenya has made a commitment not to be a haven for traffickers of any kind and is committed to working with regional partners in Ethiopia, Eritrea, Uganda and Tanzania, as well as other parts of the world who experience similar challenges. Well, to shed more light on this, we have in studio George Muse, who is an immigration consultant and practice leader at Fragomen, Kenya. Many thanks for joining us on Worldview.
Thank you, Michelle.
So this seems to be a very important meeting that has been called by the Attorney General. We're trying to see how the country can curb human trafficking, but how bad is the situation in Kenya?
Thank you, Michelle. I think the situation of human trafficking and human smuggling, as they call it, is big. And I think the closest Kenyans have come to this is the issues of Kenyans going to the Middle East. But I think to make it a bit better it's good to differentiate between human trafficking and smuggling.
Right.
Essentially, human trafficking is where people are recruited through coercion and deception, and then they are transported to other countries across the borders, and then mostly they end up being, misused as...
So these are the ones that are, especially for the Middle East, it's girls who are promised jobs in Saudi Arabia, jobs that would probably, uphold their dignity, they would expect, but then they go there and find that it is something completely different.
Correct. I mean, it's about when you're out there now, you realize you're a slave because they will withhold your document and give you to, sex trade and very inhuman treatment in terms of, akin to slave trade, where you are forced to work for long hours with very, meager payment.
Right.
And then the issue of human smuggling is different because the person being smuggled is part of the syndicate.
Right.
They voluntarily agree to, they tell you, I want to go to the US, please can you help me get there? So they are part of the syndicate, and once they are delivered into the country, then the business ends there. However, there's a risk because if they do not pay the people smuggling them, they also become part of human trafficking. Now they are used for slave trade and sex, trade.
And I understand the people that facilitate that kind of smuggling are called coyotes. But the Standard did have an exclusive interview with Attorney General Githu Muigai just yesterday. And one of the things that he noted is as much as progress has been made with regard to human trafficking in Kenya, Kenya still remains a source, a transit point, as well as a destination for human trafficking. How then, as a country, do we begin to deal with this?
I think it's true because if you look at Kenya as a source, I've just given you an instance where Kenyans go out there. As a transit, we have a lot of people from mostly Ethiopia and Eritrea that pass through Kenya, then all the way to South Africa. We've a bit of Indians, and Bangladesh being, taken through. And I think one of the easiest ways of doing this is because we have laws already, as you would know, the law of 2010, but then again the enforcement. And the people do not know these things. Very few Kenyans really understand what human trafficking is all about. So we have to sensitize people, and the media is doing a good job.
Right.
That's why I'm here, I think. And then, of course, the government in terms of enforcement. One of the biggest threats to enforcement of these laws is corruption.
Because we've seen this, especially within around the borders with Somalia, we've seen several people being smuggled in. And the worst part is they just drive right in. Nobody stops them.
Correct. And again, human trafficking is a huge business. It's actually only number 3 from drug and arms trafficking. So you can imagine the amount of money involved. And I just want to give you an example of a case that I experienced when I worked with government. Then I was at the border of Kenya and Tanzania. And there was this vehicle full of people being trafficked all the way from Moyale and the Ethiopians. Then the question would be, I was at the end of the country, so where did these people pass from all the way from Moyale through, it's a long distance.
Right.
So it can only point to issues of, lack of integrity on the enforcement. The officers, immigration, immigration are rather the border. Either they do not have the capacity or some of them are complicit. But then again, in between, a lot of, even the communities actually living along those roads encourage. In fact, they harbor these people and they are paid some little money. So corruption is indeed a big issue.
All right. And of course, in this meeting today, the Attorney General is seeking to also interact with other countries that are facing similar problems, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Uganda. Is this a collaboration that is likely to curb human trafficking?
Yeah, I think so, because if you look at the 2000 protocol on human trafficking and smuggling.
Because there's a counter-trafficking in Persons Act that was also implemented
yes,
in the
Kenya
country.
in 2010. You cannot defeat this crime as a single country because people cross the border. So, for instance, if someone is coming from Ethiopia going to South Africa, you see they will pass through very many countries. So you need the collaboration of Kenya, Tanzania, and other countries. So indeed, this is a very commendable, effort.
All right.
Yes.
And of course, Kenya is party to several international treaties with regard to human trafficking, with regard to human rights as well. Just this week, we had Kenya arrest 7 suspected human traffickers in a refugee camp. I don't know if you're very privy to the Counter-Trafficking in Persons Act, but what sentence would these people be likely to face?
Thank you. If you look at the Act 2010 from Section 3 all the way to 11, it gives various offenses. The traffickers should get at least 30 years in prison or a fine of 30 million or both. Yes.
So this is something, of course, a global problem. But one more thing that the Attorney General mentioned is that Kenya and African countries dealing with human trafficking need to borrow a leaf from how the United States has dealt with human trafficking. What lessons are those that we can learn from the United States?
I think one of the things, when you're dealing with human trafficking, the people being trafficked are victims, and the law protected them. But a lot of the time, especially in Kenya, what we've done is when we arrest people in this country, and we suspect they're being trafficked, I think the first thing we've done is charge them with Immigration Act,
right? Which
the law actually, the Act does not, the law does not support, because the law is, a victim is supposed to be supported.
They're not the criminal.
They are not the criminal.
Except, of course, for the case of human smuggling.
Yes, human smuggling, they are criminal. They are part of the syndicate. But when you're trafficked, you are a victim. And the law is you're supposed to be given protection. You're supposed to be, because you will be part of the prosecution. You're supposed to be given protection here and stay within the country for the period of prosecution. And I think the United States has done a lot of that in terms of trying to accommodate people that are victims. But then again, also it is starting to, to work against them, because a lot of these are also part of the turn against them. And I think a lot of the countries now are fearing if they start protecting people being trafficked, they will create a precedent where now everybody will be trafficked. But I think we can learn from the United States that if you have to fight this crime, you cannot, the victims cannot again be taken to court, because they should help you to identify the people that are perpetuating this. And when you start arresting them, then this will start reducing.
All right. And finally, in the case of human smuggling, of course, even the person who wants to be smuggled will be treated as a perpetrator of the crime. But many times, these people also have reasons as to why they want to be smuggled into a particular country. They're from Somalia. There's a lot of violence, and they want to be smuggled into Kenya. Why is it then that they would opt for smuggling as opposed to following the right channels to seek refugee status?
Thank you. Of course, there are factors that encourage this. Mostly it's what we call the push and pull. The push is in your country, the situation is such that the only thing you can think of is getting out.
Right.
And then the pull factor is the country you're going to, there are a lot of opportunities. Like, for instance, South Africa is a pull factor to many guys from Ethiopia. The US is a pull factor for many of us. And then, the Horn of Africa, Somalia, like you identified, is a push factor. Now, one of the reasons is getting to these countries is not easy. The visa regime is very restrictive. So people would, and some of these have already tried and they have failed to get the visa. Right. So then they opt for any other method that will get them there.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much for shedding more light on this. George Muse is an immigration consultant and a practice leader at